Final Fantasy XVI is a very long video game, especially if you do all of the side quests, which I highly recommend, as they contain a lot of world building and explore a ton of NPC characters in ways that you wouldn't get otherwise. By the time I had finished the game, I was incredibly attached to the community I had formed in Valisthea, and even though I had spent quite a bit of time with them, there was always that urge to see just a little bit more of them, and now it looks as though we just might. You're going to want to hit that subscribe button if you love Final Fantasy XVI, because today we're going to be talking about potential DLC for the game, something that YoshiP has recently commented on. YoshiP said during an interview with YouTube channel Gamer Braves that, quote, "We now understand we're getting feedback from players that have played the game, and lots of players want to see more, and we know that and we understand that. For us, we're taking that and thinking about our options moving forward, so hopefully in the near future, we can have something to give you all." This being said, YoshiP insists that Final Fantasy XVI is a complete story. Having finished the game now, I can say this is something that I completely agree with. FF16 is already a complete, coherent story. This isn't to say that there isn't any ambiguity in some places, or things that I still have a few questions about. However, I think the story is pretty straightforward for the most part, and there really isn't any need for DLC to fill in the gaps. For the most part, DLC will just be adding to the game's overall story. There's quite a bit that I want from the game to have with DLC, but there's also stuff that I want with patches and other future content in between. Now, just recently they've launched a patch to fix the game's motion blur, and everyone was quite thrilled with that. This is a team that is known for listening to all of the feedback on their games. Sometimes I swear from some of the stuff that YoshiP talks about that he stayed up to 2 AM scrolling Reddit reading every single comment. That's not necessarily a bad thing, as it lets him know fully how people are feeling about the games and precisely how to respond, and a response I do expect. For starters, the game's performance mode still does not reach a solid 60 outside of combat, and usually while exploring some of the game's bigger towns, it can see the game dipping down to 40 frames per second. I think this absolutely needs to be next on the agenda for fixes, but I think honestly an even bigger issue than that for me personally is that the game is simply too easy, and unfortunately, in order to unlock Final Fantasy mode, you have to complete the entire game. Honestly, before the game's launch, this was kind of an unspoken worry of mine. What I originally thought was going to be the case was that the game was going to be so challenging that a lot more players would need the timely accessibility rings, allowing them to nerf whichever aspects of the game they felt were difficult. In fact, this is precisely why I thought that in the state of play and all the other showings for the game, they kept emphasizing the rings, because the game is going to be calibrated fairly challenging at the start. In most of the press builds of the game, they also would equip the rings by default. Again, at the time, I thought this was because the game was actually going to be quite challenging without the rings off for the average player. However, reading the feedback in my own community, as well as speaking from my own experiences, the game simply isn't challenging enough on the normal mode, and many people feel that Final Fantasy mode still isn't challenging enough. While late game enemies spawn, you have your full kit, and there simply isn't enough being done in order to make the game challenging enough. So above all else, I feel like they need to fix the difficulty in the game, creating a proper hard mode that can be unlocked from the start. My hope is that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth will also have this as well. While 7 Remake's normal mode was a bit more challenging, it would have been nice to have a harder difficulty option from the start. I get that they like the idea of having a normal mode that is well balanced for the average player. While it may be true that some players will give up if they find the game too challenging, I feel a lot more players will give up the game if they find it so understimulating because it's too easy. And when it comes to action games in particular, there are more people looking for a challenge nowadays than not. In terms of additional icons that I want to see, I think we all know which one. Without spoilers, we were all wondering if a certain icon would appear or not, but it ultimately didn't. However, the mystery of that icon is still left set up in the narrative, so exploring that mystery content-wise is precisely what I think they should do, and also adding that icon to your roster. Shout out to patron Skullbacon and the rest of the Ultima community.